There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Travis King at Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Kevin Huynh and Bailey Richardson, partners at People & Company. Kevin, Bailey, what is up, my friends? What is going on?
What's up? We made it here.
Today, you're both going to be sharing how B2B organizations can build and cultivate their communities. First, you're going to share with us what should a business think about first when considering how they might build a community. Next, we'll dive a little bit into what to think about when designing a shared activity. And we'll finish up with sharing what warnings you both have for businesses wanting to build a community. But before we get into that, I'd love for you both to share with listeners a little bit about yourselves and what you and the team at People & Company are up to these days.
So at People & Company, we try to help organizations get their people together. For me, this starts, honestly, like growing up. I think I always found myself working on things that involved in-person events, always planning and organizing. And I think I found it as my outlet to connect with other kids at a time when I didn't always feel like I fit in. And, fast forward, that theme of getting people together and caring about community really stuck with me. And I had this formative work experience, moving to New York, organizing conferences, helping this chapter organization called Creative Mornings build up community in over 100 cities. And at some point, there was a really pivotal moment when I realized that, hey, this isn't just about me and my community. I had other people in other companies reaching out, asking for advice around like, hey, if I'm thinking about starting a community, whether it's, an ambassador program for my business or a meetup of fellow like Asian American women, what should I be thinking about? And I realized, it's bigger than me. Like this idea of community, of just groups of people who come together over what they care about, applied to more than my own interests. And from there, I would eventually link up with Bailey and our other business partner, Kai, to start People & Company with this mission of like, how can we help people get their people together? And as a business, we take on clients where we teach organizations on how to build a community, how to build an authentic community, whether that's, they're starting something under the marketing department or some, new super user program under, product. But then we also run our own podcast called Get Together, where we interview community leaders. And we just published this book called Get Together, which is a handbook on how to build a community, currently available on Amazon. Amazon bestseller in its category at some point. Yeah, so that's really exciting for us.
My name's Bailey. Kevin and I, fun fact, were born in the same hospital. True. 1 year apart. So this was is a fated partnership. But yeah, my experience growing up, my mom was she was the first female luggage loader at San Jose Airport. And then she worked at United Airlines and worked her way up to become one of the first female pilots. So I had this amazing experience of a mother who I was really proud of, but also the stories she would come back with were like pretty gnarly, just in terms of there were people who would refuse to taxi her airplane because a woman was in the cockpit. She'd have to sit in the cockpit with a lot of older ex-military guys for hours who really didn't want her in there with them. And so I think I just saw what hierarchy and what non-welcoming environments feel like for people, like up front. And I think that is like the seed of my interest in just trying to figure out better ways of people collaborating and working together. And I think, Kevin said everything really in his intro, except we're just really collaborative people. Like, we're people. And I think what we're trying to teach more people to do is how to work in a more equitable, non-hierarchical, like democratized way, where you're not just like, I'm the king of the castle talking at people. You're like giving folks a way to express themselves, participate. And if you want to work like that, we want to help people do that. We want to work in more collaborative ways with each other. And that's what we're really interested in.
Awesome. So to kick us off, what should a business think about first when considering how they might build a community?
Yeah, for us, we end up working with a number of clients that don't have a community but are interested in one. They have some people who are raising their hands that feel like they might be able to participate, maybe some super fans. So we spend a lot of time in this early phase with businesses where they're trying to just get clarity around what the word community means, and also like what is the value to them or to these potential community members. And the way we break it down is, if you can answer two questions, which is who is going to be in this community and why are these people coming together, if you can answer those two things, designing everything else down the line, like what, when, it becomes so much easier. So those two questions of like, who am I bringing together and why am I bringing them together, is something that we will spend, hours, more than hours, with clients trying to really nail down into specific language. Do you want to jump in a little bit with some examples of those peeps?
Yeah, one example that comes to mind is this community, Indie Hackers, which was actually started independently and then was acquired by Stripe, the payments company, I think a year or two ago. And Indie Hackers is this community started by Cortland and his brother that's for independent entrepreneurs, mostly like web developers and app developers starting some sort of online business without taking on funding. And they have this community where they help each other kind of navigate the complex, hard parts of like bootstrapping a business. And part of it is a forum, and part of it ends up being meetups. And they were acquired by Stripe and are now sort of incubated as like the community still somewhat runs like independently within Stripe. But the fact is that a lot of these business owners, if they use the Stripe product, and Stripe kind of knows that as long as more people are starting online businesses, a good number of them are going to utilize the Stripe product. So if they are sort of investing in cultivating a community like Indie Hackers that is helping more people do this thing, then Stripe benefits up from it. So I think from there's like a clear understanding of who, sort of like independent online entrepreneurs. And as far as why, I think there's a nuance in what Bailey said around why. It's not just why you want to build a community, and not only why like the people want to get together, but really the intersection of that. Why should this whole community exist that is really sort of a resonating purpose for the people who want to get involved? Like, starting a business is hard. We want other folks to like help each other do it. And Stripe wants to like be part of more people starting those businesses. So I think there's a really clear alignment there. And when you're thinking about starting some sort of community around your product, your service, really getting clear and kind of understanding yourself as well as understanding what the people you want to bring together want is hugely important.
Yeah, I'll jump in too with another favorite story. I feel like I should be on the Instant Pot payroll because I'm like the biggest fan of this company. But Instant Pot, if you don't know it, is this insane crock pot that has like AI technology baked into it. So this freaking crock pot knows what your latitude and longitude is, what your altitude is, and it keeps your food from burning. And it cooks things like beans, which otherwise would take hours to cook, in like 15 minutes. It's this amazing tool, but it's a little bit complicated. And the founder of Instant Pot, very early on, he didn't have many resources at his disposal. And he was like, should we start an email marketing effort within the company, or should we open up a Facebook group? And he decided to start with a Facebook group because he could connect people using Instant Pot to each other to help lighten the burden on the customer support team at Instant Pot, because the tool just has a lot of like bells and whistles. There's a lot you can do with it. So in terms of like an aligned incentive, like Kevin said, that like sort of overlapping why, what the business wants and what the customers want, people want to know how to use their Instant Pots better. And Instant Pot also wants them to have that information and to have the education they need to do that. So by creating spaces where their community could share information with each other and fostering that space, they've been able to scale customer support. And also on the back end, now they've created advocates. Like people have sprung up out of this Facebook group. There's a woman named the Butter Chicken Lady who has sold like multiple Amazon bestsellers. And the New Yorker wrote a profile on the Butter Chicken Lady, which is a fun read. But yeah, I think that's like another interesting example of the aligned incentive there is just like customer education. There's a product. They want to help people understand use cases. The company at scale can't do all of that one-on-one. And so they helped foster a community to do that for each other.
Well, it just doesn't seem too different for me, at least when I think about B2B and B2C. They both involve like a business trying to get something valuable to like a group of people. And sometimes that group of people are like independent humans in their homes buying something as a consumer, and sometimes that group of people are like CMOs that are at different companies, or you know what I mean. So to me, it's like if you are offering a product or service to folks within companies, there's an opportunity to bring together those people from like across those different companies for like a common source of value or purpose. And I think education, as Bailey mentions around Instant Pot, is one sort of obvious way one can do it. It's like, is it challenging but valuable to sort of utilize the service that you have to offer? If so, like, can you, instead of trying to be the central hub where you just publish information on like how to best get the value out of your own platform, could you actually spotlight interesting stories from community, from like your consumers that highlight how to best do it? What is the Butter Chicken Lady of like, you know, of that is the CMO at that company that like is doing something really interesting that can help others? Or can you bring those people together in some sort of way so they can exchange knowledge and better get value from this like product or service that they seem to like already really like?
Today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing. Delphix, a big data platform, had hired an agency to manage their Google ads a few years ago, but they weren't seeing the results they wanted to see. Being such a technical B2B solution, they set out to find a team that could take on their challenge. After countless proposals, they found the perfect fit: Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. In just 1 week after launching Directive's campaigns, Delphix saw their lead volume double and their cost per lead drop by 60%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
What should they think about when designing a shared activity?
Well, first, like, you know, this term shared activity, I'm just going to define it for everybody. So in our research, when we wrote our book, we interviewed hundreds of different communities. So we interviewed the Instant Pot CEO, and we interviewed people that started run clubs up at, 190th Street in Manhattan. We went all the way across the spectrum. And one of the key insights we found was that every community has a shared activity, something that is purposeful. It's tied to the reason that they're all coming together in the first place. Participatory, people can contribute to it. It's not just like an audience leaning back and listening to a lecture. And it's also repeatable. So something that they can do over and over again together. And when we say shared activity, what we're saying is it's something that's really great for a group. It's more fun with other people, or it's something that you just can't do alone. So that's what the communities come together to actually sort of realize their purpose is an activity that is done as a group. So just to make sure we have a clear definition of what we're talking about here, that's what a shared activity is. And we wanted to share a couple of our favorites with y'all today because there are some weird ones out there. And I think a lot of times people just like lean back for like the coffee hangout or like the meetup. And there's just like some really creative things that people have done out in the world. So one of my favorite ones is the World AeroPress Championship. And if you don't know what AeroPress is, it's basically a coffee making device. So a man named Alan Adler, who is a engineering professor at Stanford, wanted to make a cup of coffee, 1 cup. He didn't want to do the big brewing pot. He didn't want to get an espresso machine. He was just like, I need 1 good cup of coffee. And so he made this device that's sort of like a coffee plunger. Yeah, Google it. Google it. But it's this actually remarkable invention. And people who make coffee are like, this is an amazing cup of coffee with such a simple tool. And when it first came out, some of the biggest baristas in the world were distributors for it. So they were taking it to their countries in Denmark or in Spain or whatever. And they felt like they had to figure out how to use the AeroPress really well. They didn't have that many recipes for it. And so they're like, let's host a world championship, an AeroPress world championship. And it was like a very low-key idea. Like they had a cake in like a small room in Oslo, and a couple of people competed to try to come up with new recipes for this tool. And a bunch of people saw what they were doing, and they're like, can we have one of those? And so now there are World AeroPress Championships in, I think, 80 countries around the world. They have one grand finale each year in Sydney, and it's just like this very playful, energetic way for people to come together over a passion. And that competition side, I think it's really a great way actually just to enable people to bump into each other and interact. It's less about like the winner and more about just like it makes the activity more engaging. And I loved that they did that. The other one that I want to mention really quickly is if you haven't heard of Lego Ideas, I also love this shared activity. So Lego, I grew up like my brother played with them, but I wasn't super into them. But there are Lego super fans. Actually, I think it's a Danish company as well. It's like the #1 toy company in the world. They've been around for forever. And the Lego Ideas portion of Lego was a way to open up ideas for Lego kits to the community of Lego fans. And so people can pitch ideas for like different types of Lego kits that don't exist on themes that they think are really interesting. So do you remember what some of them are?
I don't know about making some up now. It's like if I thought it's like a Yankee Stadium like Lego like kit should be made, or like, you know, a New York City subway. If it doesn't exist yet, you as sort of a passionate community member could sort of like pitch this and get it voted on, and eventually it could be made.
Yeah, so they had a whole portal of a website where people could upload like models that they were like, I think Lego should make this. And then people would upvote the ones they loved. And then Lego engineers would go and realize these, like sourced from the community, that these were things that people were really interested in. And I thought that act of like opening up your doors to let people participate in like creating ideas that Lego could build and vote on them was like a really interesting, innovative thing for a company to do.
Yeah, I think this is, you don't necessarily like need to run a toy company or a coffee competition to take from these examples. I think that the point is, hey, you know, communities form around shared activities. It's just something you do together. That could be online, that could be in person, and you have the opportunity to think creatively about that. Like, is there a way to think about, you know, how you're getting your community together in the form of maybe a competition or challenge? Could that be interesting? Or, you know, for your B2B company, is it interesting to think about how those folks might contribute ideas to something new you want to build? So I don't know, think creatively about it. One that Bailey hadn't mentioned yet is this idea of an unconference. Like, I'm on the board of a nonprofit that is for teachers to help run professional development for other teachers. And the idea is, you know, this PowerPoints that usually heard at schools just weren't meeting their needs. They're like, why don't we meet up on a Saturday and just do this better than like the quote unquote professionals will tell us how to do it. And at an ed camp, you show up and the teachers, there isn't a set agenda. They actually in the morning put up Post-its describing like different topics they would either love to teach or they'd love to learn about. And the organizing team helps like put those into an agenda, and folks get to choose, and sort of this like the day's agenda of topics and things to learn about is created live. And then during the day, you get to show up at these sessions. And it's such a more participatory way to think about like truly serving the needs and curiosities of a community versus defaulting to, hey, I got to go design a 8-hour agenda for the next conference or summit, and we know everything that needs to be done, and it has to be these keynote talks. Like, ed camps are a lot more lightweight, but they provide still a ton of value.
And I think the thing that's important to note there is people are doing that because you're hitting on a passion point with them. And this is not something that you're just going to market to the average person. Like, communities are for people that have an overlapping passion with you. And if you are lucky enough to activate a passion in people out in the world, then you can like welcome them into the party, basically. But, you know, that's the amazing thing about I was an early employee at Instagram, and you had this experience at Creative Mornings and working closely with EdCamp. But we had people that were so passionate about what we opened up for them, like what we gave them a space to do, that they would just show up and do like host their own events, like organize their own stuff, contribute their stories. And I think that it's important, though, to note that this isn't just like the average person that's going to show up on a Saturday. This is someone that's almost like a semi-partner in your business. You should see them that way.
What warnings do you have for businesses wanting to build a community?
The warning is, if you think you're going to be able to control everything, you're not meant to go down this path of building a community around your business. So the caveat is you could run a very successful business without investing in like really cultivating a community. My personal opinion is that there's a lot of potential in what you can do if you start thinking about either, you know, your customers or some other group of stakeholders as a community. I also think that you may have more fun in the process. I think you also might make decisions in probably a more ethical way if you do so, but you don't have to. So if you choose to go down this path, our big sort of piece of advice and thesis is that you build a community with your people, not for them. And what that means is you, in many ways, let them in, as Bailey said, as like a semi-partner. And that involves relinquishing control. So, you know, one example is Notion is sort of they're probably still considered a startup, but they're a tech company that has sort of a note-taking platform. You can have spreadsheets in there, notes, wikis, all sorts of stuff. And they, you know, have a model like Slack where a lot of independent employees in the company might start using something, and eventually like that business buys like a full license for their whole company to use Notion. And Notion is encouraging folks that really like to use it to, they can host their own events or that are like Notion meetups. You can host an event where either you showcase how you're using Notion within your company or, you know, as an individual. And Notion realizes that like with this sort of model, when you spread out leadership in that sort of way, like you're just not going to be able to control everything. That isn't to say that you don't provide any sort of guidelines around what works or what is successful or what is like a code of conduct, because people need a certain amount of structure to like take up this challenge. But there's an amount you have to leave open for people to remix, to choose a little bit about what the programming is going to be about, to add their own sort of local flair to it. And that really is where the scary stuff and the magic happens. That is how someone, you know, in Austin, Texas, takes your software and like runs an event around it and sort of blows your mind. And this is like running education around it in an interesting way or showcasing ideas that you didn't even think of. So to recap, I think the big warning is if you think you can control everything that happens within your community and you're seeing yourself as more of like a compliance police, like that stuff is important because there's obviously fears about folks like misrepresenting the brand or not holding up a certain standard. And you do need to like think about those. However, you're going to have to relinquish more control than you're capable of. But if you do, I really believe you can accomplish more together with these people than you can alone.
B2B growth has always been about highlighting tactics and strategies B2B leaders can apply to their own teams to achieve explosive growth. So Kevin and Bailey, quick question for you guys. What new sales or marketing strategy is your team currently trying or thinking about in the near future?
This is an old one. I don't know if this is innovative for anyone, but I feel like this year I rediscovered the power of personal outreach. Like I think there's at least in my brain, I felt myself falling into this assumption that I needed to just produce more kind of out there for people to find, right? Like producing content and publishing on social media and putting things out there. And then but I've always felt very comfortable in like a one-on-one situation. And I think this last year, as we launched our book and we published August 20th, I put a lot of effort into one-on-one outreach, and it became hundreds of personal emails and almost 100 meetings with different community leaders that are like the absolute, like kind of perfect people for the lessons and frameworks that we're sharing. And I think that's really paid off because we at People and Company, we don't need the entire world or the general audience that exists out there. I mean, we would love it, but I mean, practically speaking,
sell 8 million books.
Okay, eventually we're going to be Marie Kondo.
Marie Kondo level.
But for the first 8,000, 80,000, 800,000, we need folks that like really, really care about this topic. And I was just thinking I can reach out to these people one-on-one and get referrals to them and spend time with them, or you know what I mean, and really get connections with them. So I rediscovered the power of personal outreach as my mystical, growth tactic this year.
Yeah, I think when you're trying to get something started, that's where it starts no matter what. There's no way you go from 0 to 80,000. Like maybe for like 2 or 3 years, there was like great, like low customer acquisition costs and everybody was just like, this is just jumping into my lap. But I just think you got to sit down and grind out the emails, And I feel like I keep seeing that over and over again. DMs, send the text messages, like personal outreach, you can't skip it. Yeah. The only other thing I'll just tack on is, I think our company, one of the things I really appreciate about Kevin and Kai, our other business partner, is we try to lead with generosity. And I think that when you give people something that's valuable, there's like a natural human response to like want to meet you there. And I kind of see the book as sort of that. Like, this book we put so much work trying to create clarity for people around a topic that we certainly care about. And I think a lot of other people care about a lot. And that has been really neat seeing that come back, us putting tons. I mean, we put a lot of work on hold and spent months of our life writing this book and rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it. And yeah, that, and, we paid attention to the design. And I think I tried to make something that would feel like a gift to someone who really cared about this. And my hope is that if it is actually that for people, that we will meet interesting folks who sense that it was like a generous, thoughtful act. And I think a lot of people I respect in marketing and sales, that's how they approach that stuff too, is like, how can I be generous and really give people something that's valuable to them and meaningful to them?
This has been such a great conversation, guys. I really appreciate you guys for hopping on. If listeners want to stay connected with you both or follow up to ask any other questions on this topic, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Oh, you can find out more about us at our website, peopleand.company. It's a .company, not .com. You can also find our book, Get Together, on Amazon. Just search Get Together. And we also run a podcast. Just search Get Together in the podcast store to hear interviews of sort of ordinary people and companies starting extraordinary communities.
Thanks, Kevin and Bailey. We really appreciate you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having us.
If you're a regular listener of B2B Growth, odds are you might enjoy sales success stories with Scott Ingram as well. Well, this year, thanks to a partnership with Outreach and Sales Hacker, our friend Scott Ingram is making the live stream of his Sales Success Summit available for free. The event is on October 14th and 15th, featuring 13 presentations and 5 panels, all presented by top-performing B2B sales professionals. You can check it out and register at top1.fm/live. That's top1.fm/live.